Story 1. The Shadow at Eagle's Bluff. Supernatural horror. I remember the drive up to Eagle's Bluff more for the silence than the scenery. Marina and I barely spoke, lulled by the winding roads and the thickening mist that clung to the mountainside. It wasn't an argument that caused the quiet. It was something else. Like the woods themselves didn't want us talking. The closer we got to the summit, the more the fog pressed against the windshield, making even the bright June afternoon feel like dusk. The lodge emerged like a ghost from the haze, an enormous timber-framed relic nestled against a black wall of pine trees. It looked beautiful in the way abandoned things sometimes do. Ivy crawling up the chimney, shutters barely hanging on rusted hinges, paint peeling like old scabs from the columns. But something about it made my chest tighten. Marina, ever the romantic, just grinned and said, "It's perfect." We had booked the place for the weekend, the entire place. A mistake, maybe. It used to be a hunting lodge a century ago, 12 rooms, a ballroom nobody used anymore, and a little library that smelled like mildew and old paper. It was far from modern, but that's what we wanted. Somewhere quiet, somewhere with no cell service. By the time we unloaded the car, twilight had bled across the treetops, smearing violet streaks over the mountaintops. Inside, the lodge was dim, even with the lanterns lit. Gilded chandeliers loomed from the ceiling, dust muting their shine. The wallpaper was yellowed and curling, patterned with old vines and faded birds. Every hallway stretched longer than it should have, tapering into shadows that flickered as we passed. That first evening passed quietly enough. We explored, made a little dinner in the outdated kitchen, and laughed about how haunted everything looked. Marina made some joke about needing holy water, and I chuckled, maybe a little too quickly. By midnight, the wind had picked up, or at least we thought it was wind. The shutters rattled hard enough to make the glass tremble, but when I checked outside, the air was perfectly still. That's when I noticed the lanterns in the hallway swaying slightly, as if something had just passed by. Marina had already gone to bed, curled under the thick blankets with a book in her hands. I stayed up, reading by the fireplace, though it hadn't taken a flame in years. Around 2 a.m., I heard it, a soft knock at our bedroom door, not frantic, not loud, just patient, like someone polite. I opened the door fast, hoping to catch whoever was playing games, but the hallway was empty, dead quiet. The only sound was the creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. Then I noticed the portraits. The lodge's long hallway was lined with oil paintings, people I didn't recognize, family maybe. The colors had dulled and the canvas cracked, but their eyes, something was off. One of the women in the far portrait, her face in half-shadow, seemed to be looking directly at me, though her head was turned slightly away. I stepped closer. Her pupils had a tiny glint, like moisture, like freshness. But when I leaned in, the effect was gone. I tried to laugh it off as I closed the door. Old houses creak. Paintings always feel like they're watching. It's just the mind playing tricks. But when I turned back to the bed, Marina was sitting upright, her eyes wide. "You heard it too, didn't you?" she whispered. I nodded. Neither of us slept well that night, not because of the knocks or the paintings or even the rattling shutters, but because just before dawn, I thought I heard someone breathing in the hallway just outside our door, long, slow, and waiting. We didn't speak of it the next morning, but something had changed in the air. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was watching. The second night began with silence. Not peace, silence. The kind that pushes against your eardrums and makes you question if the world around you has simply stopped. Marina noticed it first. She stood in the doorway of our room, mug of tea in hand, and whispered, "Do you hear anything?" I listened. No birds, no wind, and not even the soft creak of the rafters we'd heard the day before. Just an oppressive, unnatural stillness, like the whole lodge was holding its breath. We wandered down the main hallway, hesitant, as if drawn by something unspoken. I told her it was just nerves, just the altitude maybe, but I was lying. I could feel it too. The quiet felt heavy, like it had teeth. The hallway lights flickered as we passed beneath them, not once or twice, but in deliberate pulses. 3 quick flickers, 1 long dim, then nothing. Marina stopped walking. "Did you see that?" she asked. I nodded but didn't answer. I didn't want to say what I was thinking. It felt like someone or something was pacing us, measuring units. We went back to our room early that night, locked the door, pulled the curtain shut, as if that could keep something invisible out. Story 1. The Shadow at Eagle's Bluff. Supernatural horror. I remember the drive up to Eagle's Bluff more for the silence than the scenery. Marina and I barely spoke, lulled by the winding roads and the thickening mist that clung to the mountainside. It wasn't an argument that caused the quiet. It was something else. Like the woods themselves didn't want us talking. The closer we got to the summit, the more the fog pressed against the windshield, making even the bright June afternoon feel like dusk. The lodge emerged like a ghost from the haze, an enormous timber-framed relic nestled against a black wall of pine trees. It looked beautiful in the way abandoned things sometimes do. Ivy crawling up the chimney, shutters barely hanging on rusted hinges, paint peeling like old scabs from the columns. But something about it made my chest tighten. Marina, ever the romantic, just grinned and said, "It's perfect." We had booked the place for the weekend, the entire place. A mistake, maybe. It used to be a hunting lodge a century ago, 12 rooms, a ballroom nobody used anymore, and a little library that smelled like mildew and old paper. It was far from modern, but that's what we wanted. Somewhere quiet, somewhere with no cell service. By the time we unloaded the car, twilight had bled across the treetops, smearing violet streaks over the mountaintops. Inside, the lodge was dim, even with the lanterns lit. Gilded chandeliers loomed from the ceiling, dust muting their shine. The wallpaper was yellowed and curling, patterned with old vines and faded birds. Every hallway stretched longer than it should have, tapering into shadows that flickered as we passed. That first evening passed quietly enough. We explored, made a little dinner in the outdated kitchen, and laughed about how haunted everything looked. Marina made some joke about needing holy water, and I chuckled, maybe a little too quickly. By midnight, the wind had picked up, or at least we thought it was wind. The shutters rattled hard enough to make the glass tremble, but when I checked outside, the air was perfectly still. That's when I noticed the lanterns in the hallway swaying slightly, as if something had just passed by. Marina had already gone to bed, curled under the thick blankets with a book in her hands. I stayed up, reading by the fireplace, though it hadn't taken a flame in years. Around 2 a.m., I heard it, a soft knock at our bedroom door, not frantic, not loud, just patient, like someone polite. I opened the door fast, hoping to catch whoever was playing games, but the hallway was empty, dead quiet. The only sound was the creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. Then I noticed the portraits. The lodge's long hallway was lined with oil paintings, people I didn't recognize. Family, maybe. The colors had dulled and the canvas cracked, but their eyes, something was off. One of the women in the far portrait, her face in half shadow, seemed to be looking directly at me, though her head was turned slightly away. I stepped closer. Her pupils had a tiny glint, like moisture, like freshness. But when I leaned in, the effect was gone. I tried to laugh it off as I closed the door. Old houses creak. Paintings always feel like they're watching. It's just the mind playing tricks. But when I turned back to the bed, Marina was sitting upright, her eyes wide. "You heard it too, didn't you?" she whispered. I nodded. Neither of us slept well that night, not because of the knocks or the paintings or even the rattling shutters, but because just before dawn I thought I heard someone breathing in the hallway just outside our door, long, slow, and waiting. We didn't speak of it the next morning, but something had changed in the air. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was watching. The second night began with silence. Not peace, silence. The kind that pushes against your eardrums and makes you question if the world around you has simply stopped. Marina noticed it first. She stood in the doorway of our room, mug of tea in hand, and whispered, "Do you hear anything?" I listened. No birds, no wind, and not even the soft creak of the rafters we'd heard the day before. Just an oppressive, unnatural stillness, like the whole lodge was holding its breath. We wandered down the main hallway, hesitant, as if drawn by something unspoken. I told her it was just nerves, just the altitude maybe, but I was lying. I could feel it too. The quiet felt heavy, like it had teeth. The hallway lights flickered as we passed beneath them, not once or twice, but in deliberate pulses. 3 quick flickers, 1 long dim, then nothing. Marina stopped walking. "Did you see that?" she asked. I nodded but didn't answer. I didn't want to say what I was thinking. It felt like someone or something was pacing us, measuring units. We went back to our room early that night, locked the door, pulled the curtain shut, as if that could keep something invisible out. "I think it's a little girl," Marina said softly, "or was." I didn't answer. I was too focused on the portrait hanging above us. One I could have sworn hadn't been there the day before. It showed the grand room we now sat in, nearly identical, except there were 3 figures in the painting, 2 adults on the staircase, and a small girl behind them, her face turned toward the viewer, smiling. But the longer I looked, the more her expression began to change. I blinked. She wasn't smiling anymore. That night, the lodge seemed to breathe deeper, colder. Every hallway felt like a tunnel, every door like a trap. Even our reflections in the glass, mirrors, windows, darkened screens seemed just slightly out of sync. A twitch here, a blink there. Marina cried when she found the rocking chair moving on its own. No breeze, just a slow back and forth, back and forth. "It's not angry," she said between breaths. "It's lonely." Maybe that made it worse. Maybe that's what made it want us to stay. We were past sleep by the 3rd night, not from choice, just incapable. The walls breathed too loudly. The lodge had a pulse now. The child wasn't hiding anymore. She wanted us to see her. At first it was quick things. A tug at Marina's sleeve while she was brushing her teeth. The faint, click of a door locking behind us. But by dusk, we felt it watching from every dark corner, every mirror and picture frame. The house creaked and responded like it understood us, like it wanted something. The suitcase lay open on the bed, half packed. Neither of us could bring ourselves to finish. It wasn't fear anymore. It was exhaustion. We didn't say it, but both of us had the same thought. It won't let us leave. Marina found the photo when she opened the old desk drawer. It was tucked inside a leather-bound guest book, brittle with age. A faded black and white image, no larger than her palm. 3 people, a man and a woman, standing in the exact room we now occupied, and between them, barefoot, with a small doll in one hand, stood a little girl. The girl's eyes were dark blotches in the photograph, her face half turned, but the background was unmistakable. The same fraying wallpaper, the warped floorboard near the hearth. She had once stood here. Maybe she never left. Marina stared at it for a long time before saying anything. "I think we're repeating something," she whispered. "This place, it doesn't forget." That night, the lodge shed its skin. The ordinary became hostile. We tried to leave, twice. The front door wouldn't budge, deadlocked from the inside, even though it had no lock. We tried a back door near the pantry, but as we stepped into the corridor, every light went out at once, one by one. Click, click, click. In the dark, we heard her. Pattering feet across the upper floor, laughter trickling down through the vent shaft, the slow creak of the rocking chair upstairs, the one we'd avoided since it began moving on its own. And then came the whisper, right behind my ear. "Stay." I turned, but there was only darkness and the smell, like wet wood and old cloth, the scent of something forgotten and buried. We retreated into the library, the only room where the fireplace stayed lit. I shoved a chair under the doorknob. Marina sat on the rug, hugging herself, still clutching the photo. "She doesn't know she's gone," she said. "Or maybe she wants us to take her with us." The fire sputtered, shadows stretched longer than they should have, curling toward us like reaching fingers. Something moved behind the bookcases, low to the ground, quick. The giggle came again, not playful this time, but closer to pleading. And then, as thunder rolled outside, the library door opened. Not burst, just slowly, deliberately, as though invited. Standing in the doorway was the little girl, soaked, pale, and barefoot. Her hair hung in dripping strands over her face. Her dress, Victorian lace, clung to her like seaweed, and in her hand, what I thought at first was a doll, was a bundle of string and cloth and buttons stitched into the rough shape of a person. Marina didn't scream. She couldn't. She only stared. The girl stepped into the room. Her feet made no sound on the wood. The fire flared once, then died. Total dark. I didn't see what happened next, but I felt her hand on mine, cold, weightless, and impossibly sad. Then nothing. We left just after dawn. No discussion, no breakfast. The front door opened like it had never been locked. As we drove down the winding road, I glanced at Marina. Her hands trembled on the wheel, knuckles pale. The photo was gone, vanished from her coat pocket. Neither of us spoke about it, but just before the trees swallowed the last view of the lodge, I looked back. There was someone on the porch, small, barefoot, watching. A girl, maybe, or a shadow. I'll never go back to Eagle's Bluff. Story 2. Descent into Madness. Psychological horror. They always say the mountain changes you. I didn't think they meant it literally, not like this. Everest was a dream. a shimmering postcard pinned to the back wall of my mind for years. And now, here I was, 5,000 meters up, gasping at air that felt thinner than memory, boots dragging over brittle crusts of ice and stone. I should have felt triumphant, but instead, every step felt wrong. We were a small group, 6 of us, including the guide. Strangers mostly. John was the only one I spoke to easily. His steady presence gave me something to anchor to when the wind screamed louder than my thoughts. Supplies were short, and we'd rushed to beat an incoming storm. But even with the risk, the views were unearthly. Jagged glacier tongues splitting into infinity, a pink gold sun melting into the clouds below like a candle into fog. Beautiful, but hollow. I felt it even then, something off in the silence. I don't remember exactly when I started losing track of time. Maybe it was after the second night, when I woke up unsure whether I had slept at all. The cold seeped into everything, into my bones, into my head. I couldn't even think clearly. It was like my mind echoed back on itself. Then came the voice. It was near sunset. I'd strayed a little higher up the slope just to feel the view. My breath rasped in my ears, and the horizon bled red through the cloud line. I turned to head back, and I heard it. "Sarah," it said, low, familiar. My heart jumped. "John," I called, hoarse, and then, "I'm here." I saw him, or thought I did. A dark figure, maybe 30 meters off, motionless in the snow. A faint glow around his head, his headlamp. I felt relief swell in me like warmth. I waved and stumbled forward, but he was gone, just gone. I stood there, disoriented. I blinked snow out of my lashes, nothing but empty white and pink twilight. No footprints but my own. John was back at camp. He hadn't moved, I knew that. I turned and ran, or tried to. My steps crunched faster, but the world pressed in. The air was syrup, too thin to fill my lungs. I collapsed into camp shaken, my skin raw from the cold. I didn't tell them, not that night. Just curled into my tent, zipped the bag up tight, and pretended the walls could protect me. But I couldn't pretend when I heard it again. Not the voice this time, something worse. The wind scraped over the tent like claws across fabric, high and hungry, and beneath that, so faint I almost missed it. Laughter, not mine, not anyone's. I held my breath. It stopped. Then footsteps, just a crunch, another, then silence. No shadows moved, no one called my name again. But I stayed awake until morning, staring at the wall of my tent like it might rip open any second. I told myself it was just the mountain playing tricks. Altitude does that. Hallucinations, dreams. But in that pale morning light, as I looked out over the endless white ridges, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching from just behind the sun. Something waiting for me to come a little higher. It wanted me to keep climbing, and I would. I had to, even if part of me already knew whatever I was chasing up there wasn't the summit anymore. It was something else, something colder, something deeper, something that already had its hooks in my mind. I barely slept. Not that it made any difference. Dreams and waking hours had already begun to blur like frost melting on a mirror. The cold was constant, but it wasn't just that. Something had changed since I saw John's silhouette in the snow, since I realized it wasn't really him. That night, inside the fragile fabric of my tent, I wrapped myself in every layer I had. I could hear the wind scraping past like dry leaves on bone, a pitch that seemed tuned to some frequency just above thought. And then I heard it, not the wind, not snow shifting or gear creaking, breathing, software steady, close. It was right outside the tent wall. I stopped breathing myself, ears straining until they hurt. Something brushed the nylon, light but definite. A fingertip? A gloved hand? I didn't move. Then I heard it, a whisper. It wasn't in any language, not really, more like intention. A breath just long enough to feel like words, just vague enough that my brain tried to fill in the blanks. It wanted me to move. I could feel it, not just outside, but inside, a suggestion planting itself behind my eyes like a seed. My fingers were numb, but I yanked the zipper down and burst out barefoot into the snow. My breath turned white in the moonlight, and the cold bit so hard I thought my toes cracked. No one was there. The camp was silent, all 6 tents still. My own stood behind me, open and flapping. No prints but mine in the snow. I stood there for a long time, skin burning with cold and eyes scanning every shadow, hoping, fearing that something would move. Eventually, I stumbled back into the tent. John checked on me later, saw my red feet and pale face, and frowned. He made me tea, said I must have been spooked. The guide told me I'd need to stay alert. The altitude was messing with everyone, but I know what I felt. And later that night, I noticed my boot laces were untied, both of them, neatly unlooped. I always double knot them before sleeping, always. I didn't say anything, just tied them again with shaking hands and sat still in the darkness. The next morning, I started writing notes, just little things. Boots were tied. John is real. This is day 6. This is real. I left them beside my sleeping bag just in case I forgot. I wasn't sure what I could trust anymore, least of all myself. Then, on the 3rd night, it happened again. This time, I was awake. Definitely. I hadn't even closed my eyes. The wind had died for a few minutes, just long enough for me to hear the whisper again, but this time it wasn't outside. It came from within the tent, and worse, it was my voice. Faint and breathy, barely more than a thought made audible. But it said, clear as anything, let's go. I lay frozen, listening, waiting. Nothing else came, just that one echo, curling into my spine like ice. I didn't sleep after that. I just stared at the thin ceiling of the tent and tried not to think about how small the barrier was between me and whatever waited out there, or in here. And for the first time since arriving on the mountain, I didn't want to climb anymore. I wanted to go down. But something inside me didn't. The storm hit like a slammed door. There was no warning, no shift in the wind, no drop in pressure I could feel, just white, swallowing everything. We had reached high camp just short of 6,500 meters. Battered, wired from fatigue, the summit was a day's climb away, but the blizzard made that impossible. The guides muttered about barometric collapse and radio silence. We were stuck, trapped on a ledge no wider than a bus, surrounded by empty white. Inside my tent, the storm sounded like a living thing, scratching, shrieking. I pressed earplugs in, but the howling found its way through the foam around my skull into me. Time warped. I don't know how long I lay there. My thoughts had started talking to each other, loudly, competing over what was real. That's when I became convinced they were planning to leave me. John, May, the guides. I heard them talking just outside my tent, their voices weirdly distant, like underwater echoes. I couldn't make out words, but the tones were decisive, cold. I unzipped the flap a sliver, blinding white, no figures, no movement, just that endless curtain of snow. But the voices kept going. I closed the flap again, sat with my knees to my chest. My heartbeat was too fast, too loud. I felt it before I saw it. A presence brushing my right shoulder, a weight, gentle, reassuring. I turned. No one. I laughed, just once. It sounded wrong, like someone else imitating me. To calm down, I opened my notebook, wrote, "I am real. I am Sarah. I am at high camp." I looked away to dig out water tablets. 10 seconds, maybe less. When I looked back, the page had changed. Same handwriting, same pressure, same pen. But the sentence now read, "We are real. I am Sarah. I am almost there." We. I flipped to previous pages. More notes I didn't remember writing. Tiny marginal scribbles. "Don't listen. Let her sleep. The snow hides doors." My hand shook too much to hold the pen. And then John's voice came, not outside, not through the tent wall, inside my head. "Keep climbing," he said. "You're almost above it. One more ridge." He sounded so calm, like the real John, like how he spoke on day 2 when I'd struggled with crampons on a sheer patch of blue ice and he told me I could do it. But this was different. His words weren't heard. They were implanted. Before I knew it, I had my boots on, no socks, jacket only half zipped, no gloves. I stepped into the white, no horizon, no up or down, just a tunnel of snow that closed behind me with every step. I don't remember how long I walked. I don't remember falling, or the point where my legs gave up, but I remember the cold, deep, blood deep. I remember my skin feeling like cracked porcelain. When I came back, I was inside a different tent. John and May were leaning over me, their eyes enormous. Someone had stripped off my frozen outer layers. I was wrapped in blankets, emergency foil crinkling with each breath. My mouth tasted of metal. My mind didn't feel like mine anymore. I asked what had happened. No one answered right away. Eventually, John said, "You walked straight into the storm. Alone, no gear. We found you hours later. You were smiling." I didn't remember that. I didn't remember any of it. All I remembered was walking into the white and the strange comfort of having a second set of footsteps beside mine that never touched the snow. I don't remember collapsing, only that when I opened my eyes, the light in the tent had changed. Bluer somehow, like dawn, but wrong. John was crouched beside me, his face hollowed with worry. May hovered behind him, lips tight. Outside, the wind had eased, but not stopped. They were packing, preparing to descend. I couldn't tell if it had been a day or 3 since I wandered into the storm. "We're going down," John said quietly. "You need thicker air." I tried to speak, but my mouth didn't work right. My voice sounded like someone else mimicking me. They tied a cord around my waist. I didn't ask why. I already knew. I was a liability now. A wanderer. I walked between them as we descended, lashed to the rope like ballast. My feet barely touched the snow. I don't remember choosing where to step. It was as if something else moved me, like a marionette, half aware of its own strings. Time broke. It didn't stretch or compress. It fractured. 10 minutes would disappear like a blink. Other times, a single step took an eternity. The crunch of snow beneath my boot echoing like thunder in my skull. Once, while waiting for May to check the anchor line, I looked up and saw myself. She stood on a nearby ridge. No rope, no oxygen mask. Just me, 20 meters away, head tilted in curiosity. Watching, same parka, same posture. But her smile didn't match mine. I blinked. She was gone. The others didn't believe me when I mentioned it that night. Maybe I never mentioned it. By then, They had begun treating me like someone too fragile to correct, smiling too long, speaking too slowly. I began to lose track of my thoughts. They slipped between the cracks. At night, I would reach for my notebook and find pages already filled, entries I hadn't written, words not quite mine. She's quieter now. We're almost ready. The snow listens better than people. Stop asking who's writing this. You already know. Signed, Sarah II. Sometimes the handwriting matched mine perfectly. Sometimes it didn't. I stopped writing. What was the point? I no longer trusted the words once they hit the page. The voices hadn't gone away. They had just grown cleverer, more familiar. Sometimes I'd hear John speaking, only to turn and find his mouth closed. Worse still was the new voice, my own. Late one night, huddled in a lower camp, I heard her, me, whisper from just outside the fabric, "We shouldn't have come down." I didn't sleep after that. The next day, I tried to ask John if he had ever heard things too. I never finished the question. He looked at me like I had already asked it, like he was afraid of the answer I might give myself. The final stretch toward base camp blurred into a dream. The mountain seemed to breathe beneath us. Boulders whispered as we passed. Clouds curled into shapes too precise to be natural. With each step lower, the world should have become more grounded, but I didn't trust any of it. Even the snow tasted strange when I let it melt on my tongue. Sweet, familiar. By the time we reached the edge of base camp, I barely recognized it. The tents looked like toys. The wind had a different pitch. My body was heavy again, but my thoughts didn't return. Not all of them. Inside the radio tent, wrapped in blankets, they asked me what happened. I tried to tell them. I really tried. But everything came out twisted, out of order, like I was describing a dream I hadn't had yet. I remember saying, "There were two of me." May looked away. John just nodded. Even now, back in the city, weeks later, I don't feel entirely here. Shadows still follow me longer than they should. Elevators make my ears pop too quickly, and sometimes on quiet streets or in the stillness before sleep, I hear her again. My voice from behind me. Keep climbing. Story 3. Beyond the Last Peak. Survival horror. The last normal thing I remember was the sun slipping behind the jagged edge of Santiago's skyline. Gold bled into the clouds like ink in snow. From the window of the charter flight, the Andes looked like frozen waves, motionless and immense. We were laughing, all 28 of us, rugby teammates, girlfriends, 2 guides. A long weekend of skiing and adrenaline in Valle de las Lágrimas. It was supposed to be the perfect trip. I can still hear the engine of the Snowcat roaring as we loaded up at the airstrip. I sat near the back, wedged between Diego and Thomas, our gear piled behind us, skis clanking. We sang part of a fight song. Someone passed around a handful of caramel candies, and I remember thinking, God, I was so stupid. I remember thinking I didn't bring enough socks. We started climbing fast. The sun dropped behind the ridgeline, and everything turned blue. Wind beat at the windows, and outside the glass, it was like the mountains were holding their breath. Valle de las Lágrimas was hours away. No lights, no cell signal, just white, endless white. Then came the sound, a metallic pop. The Snowcat shuddered. Gustavo, who was up front with the driver, twisted around and yelled something, but we couldn't hear over the grinding of gears. The machine veered left, and suddenly It felt like the ground vanished beneath us. We were falling. There was screaming. Then a moment of total silence, like we'd been swallowed by the sky. Then the crash. Steel bent like paper. Glass exploded. My head hit someone's knee. Someone's shoulder hit my ribs. We tumbled and slammed into the snow in a roar of metal and bone. The snowcat didn't so much stop as collapse. I blacked out. When I came to, it was night. Bitter cold bit my face. The roof was torn open. The wind screamed like it wanted in. Beside me, Diego wasn't moving. Blood had frozen at the corners of his mouth. I tried to call out, but my voice cracked dry in my throat. It was Tomas who helped me crawl out. His hand was shaking, lips split open, pupils like pinholes. We found 3 others still alive in the back. The rest, I saw them sprawled like broken dolls, limbs twisted, red staining the snow. 12 were dead. Some died instantly. Some lingered, bleeding into the ice while the rest of us fumbled to drag them clear. I remember the weight of Florencia in my arms, her hair stiff with frost, blood leaking from her scalp. She had been talking about teaching kindergarten just an hour before. The cold was relentless. It didn't nip, it ate. Our coats weren't enough. Frostbite came quick. Fingers turned gray, toes numb. We ripped insulation from the snowcat walls, covered holes with seat cushions, tried to shield the injured. It wasn't shelter, it was a coffin with windows. That night, the wind didn't sleep. We huddled in silence, afraid to move, afraid to speak. Someone sobbed quietly in the dark, the sound lost to the storm. We had a few backpacks, candy, vacuum-packed meats, a bottle of cola that turned solid by morning. I kept thinking, they'll come for us. Planes, radios, signal flares. But the snow just kept falling. Gustavo took over on the second day. He had a way of speaking that made your spine straighten even if you were shivering to death. He limped into the middle of our crude shelter, face grim, and said it plain. No one's coming soon. We're on our own. Someone argued. Someone else cried. I stared at my hands, already raw and cracked, and said nothing. The second night, we tried to build a fire from seat padding and wires. It didn't work. The cold was so deep it felt like it was inside our blood. A girl, Luciana, I think, held her boyfriend's hand all night. He was already dead. By the third day, we stopped checking the bodies. The dead weren't going anywhere, and neither were we. We didn't know it then, but this was only the beginning. The mountain had already decided who it would keep. By the fourth day, we had stopped pretending this was temporary. The first 3 days blurred together in a frozen panic. We spent them shivering inside what was left of the snowcat, wrapping the dead in torn nylon and propping debris over the gaps to keep the wind out. It didn't help much. The cold found its way in. It always did. The candy was gone first, then the vacuum-packed cold cuts, torn apart by shaking hands. I shared my last peanut butter packet with Thomas. He was coughing blood by then and barely registered it. We melted snow in aluminum thermoses over a Zippo lighter, trying not to spill a drop. But water wasn't what we needed. Our bodies were caving in, quietly consuming themselves, muscles hollowing out day by day. I remember sitting beside Diego's body, my cheek pressed to the fuselage wall and realizing I hadn't blinked in maybe 5 minutes. My thoughts were slow. My skin burned, not from heat. Nothing warm existed up here, but from the cold boring deep, as if it wanted to mine through bone. At night, we didn't talk. No one did. The silence between us was thicker than the ice outside. Groans would rise now and then from those still alive, but barely. Some whispered names in their sleep, loved ones, pets, prayers spoken through chattering teeth. And still, the wind howled across the peaks, covering us in another layer of white each morning. On the sixth day, the radio sparked to life. For a few frantic minutes, we thought the world was looking for us. One of the guides, a quiet man named Renzo, managed to hail a patrol frequency. The reply was thin and broken with static, but unmistakable. No visual, search called off. Too remote. That silence after the last word felt like a death sentence. Tomas broke down. He curled into himself and sobbed quietly until he couldn't anymore. Others stared at the wall or shut their eyes and didn't open them again for hours. Gustavo stood in the center of our sad little shelter, jaw locked. Then he spoke. We survive. We do not wait. We do not die. No one argued. What could we say? But no one moved either. Not really. Time warped after that. Some hours stretched forever. Others vanished like breath on a window. The bodies froze into strange poses. A few of us tried to keep the dead stacked near the edges, hoping they could insulate us somehow. I hated that thought, that their last use on earth was to block the wind. On the seventh day, a sound changed everything. It was coughing, wet, guttural. When we looked, it was Anna, one of the quieter girls, holding Matthias in her lap. His skin was blue. His breath gurgled once more, then stopped. We waited. Someone reached out to close his eyes, but they were already covered with ice. Nobody said it. But we all thought it. He was the first. That night, no one slept. Not for fear of the cold, but because the unthinkable had moved a step closer. The next morning, Renzo didn't wake up. Anna was catatonic. Diego's face was disappearing under frost, and we were all starving. My legs wouldn't stop shaking. My stomach hurt in ways that didn't feel like pain, but something deeper. Emptiness, like a scream with no mouth. The hunger wasn't just in my belly. It was in my jaw, my chest, even my fingertips. A gnawing ache that whispered things I wasn't ready to hear. Whispers began, quiet, shameful. What else can we do? If someone's already gone? Nobody dared finish a sentence, not out loud, not yet. Gustavo called a meeting. We gathered in a half circle beneath the cracked ceiling of the fuselage, half buried in snow. No one made eye contact. Frost steamed from our mouths. The bodies lay behind us like shadows. We are dying, he said, and we have no food. He didn't say it outright. He didn't have to. The words were already inside us, waiting to be spoken. We wait one more day, someone murmured. Just one. We all nodded. One more day. Just one. I don't remember who said it out loud first. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was someone else. But the moment the words hung in the air, they never left. If someone dies, we don't let it go to waste. That night, we sat in a circle, those still conscious, still lucid enough to face what waited in the dark. Some couldn't speak. Others stared, the snow piling outside, as if it might swallow us whole and save us from deciding. No one agreed, but no one objected. The bodies were there, still frozen, still human. When morning came, the choice was made. We took Renzo first. He had been gone 2 days. His face was peaceful, untouched by the violence that had taken so many others. We carried him out under the dead-weight sky and laid him down on the ice away from the others. The sun had vanished behind steel-colored clouds. The air was so cold it no longer stung, just numbed. Matthias The medical student volunteered. He didn't speak. He just nodded once and took the largest shard of glass we could find, jagged, green-tinted, from the cockpit window. His hand shook violently, even through his gloves. We turned away as he began. The sound is what stayed with me, not the sight. The sound of fabric tearing, of glass scraping frozen skin, of something private being dismantled. The act itself was quick, but the silence afterward felt endless. That night, we ate. No one looked at what we were chewing. We kept our eyes low, our minds lower. My hands were shaking so badly I had to brace my wrist just to hold what was passed to me. I tasted nothing. I chewed and swallowed like an automaton. The cold in my bones was deeper than any horror in my head. Some gagged, some wept. Some simply sat there chewing, eyes empty. The next day, no one talked about it. No one needed to. Something had changed in us. An invisible border crossed, never to be retraced. We began to see death not as tragedy, but as necessity. The storm outside refused to break. It just deepened. One of the girls, Louisa, refused to eat. She curled into herself near the tail end of the wreckage and stared out at the snow for hours. Gustavo didn't pressure her. None of us did. That was part of the new understanding. Those who didn't want to partake weren't forced. But they'd last only as long as the cold allowed. A week passed, then another. More died, quietly, without drama, slipping away in their sleep or fading after days of silence. We kept a grim order. Those who passed were taken outside and placed with the others. We stopped thinking of them as friends. They were bodies now, resources, sustenance. I hated myself for how easily I adjusted. I tried to remember who Renzo was, his voice, his laugh. I couldn't. All I remembered was the curve of bone under frozen muscle, the brittle crackle of tendon beneath glass. One night, I ate a piece I knew had once belonged to Diego, my best friend. I chewed slowly, telling myself it was something else, anything else, a root, a leaf, a lie. But I knew what it was. I felt it in my teeth. I felt it in my heart, and I kept eating. Gustavo kept us alive, not just with plans or rationing, but with his presence. He made lists. He kept inventory. He organized who watched the perimeter, who melted snow, who cleaned the tools. He didn't mourn in front of us. He didn't falter. I think that's what scared me most. His eyes were focused, colder than the wind, like he'd made peace with something inside himself we couldn't yet name. Eventually, there were fewer than 10 of us. One morning, I woke to find that Louisa had stopped breathing. Her hands were curled like claws, frost crusting her lips. We didn't take her outside that time, not right away. We were weaker, hungrier. The line between mourning and hunger had blurred completely. By then, we were no longer shocked by anything. Even the groans from those still alive seemed distant, like echoes from another world. Survival had become a habit, a gruesome one, yes, but a habit nonetheless. I carved a tally line into the fuselage wall beside my seat every time the sky shifted. Not sunrise. There was no sun, just a dim lightning behind the clouds that told us another day had come and gone. I lost count after 33. That was when Gustavo looked at me, eyes shadowed, and said, "It's time. We can't stay here." He pointed to the peaks, a path, a plan. That night, 5 of us packed what was left, scraps of food, bits of melted metal shaped into walking poles, and prepared to leave the fuselage behind, the grave behind. The others stayed. Some couldn't walk, some wouldn't. We didn't say goodbye. We stepped into the blizzard and didn't look back. We left the wreckage just after the wind changed. Gustavo said it was a break in the storm. I don't know if he was right or if we just needed to believe something different. Either way, we moved. 5 of us, barely walking, barely speaking, barely human. 2 poles of scavenged aluminum, scraps of food, strips of cloth wrapped around hands that no longer felt pain. We didn't look at each other as we left. We didn't look back either. Behind us was a frozen graveyard we had slept in, fed from, wept beside. The climb started sharp and got worse. Snow was everywhere, but not soft, not anymore. It had crusted into layers of ice, brittle at the surface, dense beneath. Each step was a gamble. We moved upward, toward the ridge Gustavo pointed to on a hand-drawn map burned into his memory. 15 miles, that's what he said. 15 miles of impossible. Tomas fell first. He wasn't dead, just empty. We shook him. We shouted. He looked up at us like he couldn't remember why we were there or who we were. When we tried to lift him, he let go. Just let go. We left him, still breathing. None of us cried. Not anymore. The second night came without a sky. The wind screamed without direction. I lost feeling in my feet, then my fingers. My face burned with frost so deep I thought my skin would crack. Somewhere during the night, I closed my eyes and saw my mother's kitchen. She was humming. The radio was on. The kettle was whistling. I was warm. I woke, buried under snow. For a few minutes, I didn't know who I was, my name, my voice, gone. Then I felt the metal pole still clutched in my hand and remembered. Survival? That was the only name we had now. Gustavo was the one who pulled me free. His beard was rimed in ice, his lips cracked and blackening, but his eyes still burned. I don't think I'll ever forget the look in them, like a furnace buried in ice. We climbed again. On the second day, the sky broke open, not blue, just thinner. The wind lessened, and there, beyond the jagged slope of rock and white, a dark speck moved against the snow, a shadow. We waved the poles, screamed, though our voices were torn from raw throats. Gustavo fired the last flare, and this time it was seen. The helicopter came like a ghost. Too quiet, too late. I remember the moment it landed, but not getting inside. I remember the heat of the interior, but not what I said. The flight crew looked at us like we weren't people. I don't blame them. We weren't. They wrapped us in thick blankets, fed us warm fluids I couldn't swallow. My fingers were purple. My mouth blistered from cold and silence. My eyes refused to close. The others who had made the climb, Gustavo, Anna, Mikko, they stared out the windows like the mountain was still out there, still waiting. Maybe it was. From the air, the wreckage looked like a scar on the world, just a bent metal husk, half eaten by white. They asked us questions, so many, but we didn't answer. What could we say? That we had eaten the dead? That we remembered their names even as we carved them? That we had saved each other's lives one bite at a time? They wrote their headlines. Cannibal survivors found in Andes. That's how they saw us. But what we became out there, it wasn't savage. It wasn't monstrous. It was human at its edge. When we touched down in Santiago again, the sun was setting, just like it had the day we left. But that world, the one we'd flown out of, didn't exist anymore. We'd passed beyond it, beyond warmth, beyond hope, beyond the last peak. And something had followed us back. I still see them at night, the ones we left behind, not as ghosts, not angry, just watching, as if waiting to see what we'll do next. Story 4. Adrift, Sea Survival Horror. The ocean had gone quiet, too quiet. That's when we realized how badly the storm had broken us. It hit at night. No warning, no time to prepare. Just the sudden groan of the hull and the shriek of wind slamming into our sails like a wall of glass shattering around us. Sam was below deck when it started. I was securing the cooler hatch. The squall descended in a single breath. Rain, salt, and wind punching the catamaran sideways. For a full minute, I couldn't see her. I shouted her name until my voice cracked, until the sound of it was torn away. We lost the engine within the hour. The fuel line snapped when the stern slammed into a cresting wave. I remember the moment we realized it. Sam clutching the useless throttle, shouting that it was gone. The electronics followed soon after. Salt water doesn't just short-circuit wires, it kills them. Slowly, silently. We tried the radio for a while, whispering into dead air like fools. By dawn, the storm had passed, but we were drifting. Nothing but the creak of the damaged sail above and the groan of soaked wood below. The clouds were gone. The sky was painfully blue, but the ocean had changed. It wasn't the same water we had left behind in Hawaii. It was still, watching, breathing slowly beneath us. Not a single swell, not a breeze. No birds, no foam, not even a single floating scrap from the violence of the night before. Just us. And the silence. Sam said it first. "It feels like it's waiting." I didn't respond. I just scanned the horizon and found nothing. No ships, no land, no signal. The catamaran drifted in an invisible current, sluggish and broken. We tried to fix what we could. The sail, torn across one edge, could only be raised halfway, luffing uselessly without a true wind. The solar panels were fried. The GPS screen flickered like an insect dying under glass. The first full day after the storm was when the quiet really settled into us. I've never known a silence like it. It presses on the skin, the kind that makes you hear your heartbeat in your throat. Sam kept checking the water purifier like it might suddenly start working better just by being stared at. I kept trying the radio every hour, twisting the dial through static, waiting for a human voice. At one point, a seabird circled overhead. It came from nowhere, coasting in slow, smooth arcs above the broken mast. Sam saw it first and smiled, thinking it was a good sign. I grabbed the binoculars. It was pale gray, mottled, probably a juvenile. But something was wrong with the way it flew, like it didn't flap, didn't even move. It made 3 circles, then it vanished. Not flew off, vanished. After that, we stopped talking for a while. Maybe we didn't want to say it out loud, that something was off. Not just the storm, not just the damage, but the way the sea looked back at us, as if we weren't survivors, but trespassers. By nightfall, the stars came out in a smear, and the water turned black as ink. No sound except for the occasional creak of the boat's wounded skeleton. No wind to push us. Not even the slap of a wave. Just the stillness and the sense that we were not alone. We weren't scared yet. But the ocean had begun to open its eyes. When I went into the water, I felt the depth under me like a mouth opening. It was the 3rd day when the boat stopped moving altogether. No wind, no drift, just a heavy stillness that wrapped itself around us like wet wool. The sea had become a pane of black glass, unbroken in all directions. It should have been peaceful, but it wasn't. Something was wrong with the engine intake, even though the engine was useless. Clogged lines were drawing seaweed and rot into the lower compartment. The smell was unbearable, something between sulfur and death. If it got worse, it could contaminate our last clean water. I didn't want to go in. Every cell in my body screamed against it, but there was no choice. I strapped the rope to my waist and slipped into the water. Immediately I felt the change. The surface was sun-warmed, but just beneath that, cold. Not just temperature cold, something older than cold, something vast, the kind of cold that makes you feel like you're not supposed to be there. Sam knelt on the edge, knuckles white on the rail. I gave her a thumbs up and dove under. The sea beneath the catamaran was murky, thick with threads of kelp and something else, slippery, mucus-like. I reached the intake grill and began pulling at the clumps. My heart hammered. I kept glancing back toward the blurry surface. That's when the water shifted. At first, I thought it was current. But no, it wasn't water moving past me. It was something moving through it. I looked down. Shapes, massive, slow-moving. I couldn't see clearly, not at first. Then movement, a ripple, a flicker of silver. Then fins, 7 of them. They came out of the deeper blue like ghosts, silent and graceful, circling wide beneath the hull. Not curious, not aggressive, just watching. One moved closer. I froze. The world above seemed unreachable. It passed beneath me, slow and sure, a torpedo of muscle and scarred skin. A great white, massive, older than any I'd seen in documentaries. Its eyes were milky, unfocused, yet I swear it saw me. As it turned, its tail flicked, and I felt it, a brush against my ankle, soft as cloth. I kicked toward the surface. Above, Sam screamed. I broke through the water, gasping, thrashing. My fingers found the rope. I climbed, legs kicking frantically as more fins sliced the water around me. One slapped the hull so hard the boat rocked sideways. Sam was reaching for me, crying out. I don't even remember getting back on board. Just the feeling of hands on mine, of knees scraping fiberglass, of bile in my throat. Once I was safely on deck, we collapsed into each other, panting. I couldn't speak. My skin felt raw, my heart thudding in my ears. They came out of nowhere, Sam whispered. But they hadn't. They'd been waiting. After that, neither of us went near the edge again. The sea was no longer water. It was presence. It was hunger. It was patient. At night, we swore we saw them still. Not every night, not clearly, but once I woke to a faint scraping sound against the hull like sandpaper dragged in circles. I crept out, squinted into the darkness, and thought I saw a fin drift lazily past, backlit by starlight. We huddled in the cabin, doors shut, portholes sealed. The boat creaked and swayed as if cradled by something enormous. The ocean was no longer indifferent. It was watching, and it remembered. The sea didn't whisper in words. It used our own minds against us. After the sharks, silence took over again. Not peace, just absence. An emptiness that stretched from horizon to horizon, pressing in like a pressure change before a quake. We drifted without direction. Every movement of the boat felt like it came from something beneath, not the wind. The sails hung limp, one of them shredded along the edge like chewed skin. Food was running out, water too. We had rationed everything down to miserable bites. A can of fruit became a sacred event, a spoonful each, once a day. Crackers were soft and fuzzy with green mold. We ate them anyway. Sam nearly spilled what little water we had left. She'd been trying to fix the purifier with shaking hands. fingers swollen and red. One slip, and the container rocked forward, sloshing. I caught it in time, but something about the look in her eyes, when it happened, she wasn't really seeing me. She was seeing something behind me. We stopped talking about rescue. There was nothing to say. Each day stretched longer than the last, time bending under the weight of heat and thirst. The sun was a white disk that seared everything it touched. At night, the cold rolled in like punishment. We shivered beneath soaked towels, trading watch turns even though there was nothing to watch for. Except sometimes we heard things. Sam woke me one night, her voice hushed and frightened. "Do you hear them?" she whispered. "What?" I mumbled, barely waking. "Birds," she said. "Seagulls. I heard them circling." There were no birds. I sat up, listened. Just the groan of the mast, the slap of a distant wave, and yet I thought I caught something too. A sound, faint and quick, like wings over water. Another night, I saw something. I was on deck, staring into the black, when I noticed a shape just past the boat. It was floating. No, moving. A man, face up, just far enough to be unclear. I squinted. He was bobbing, drifting closer. His eyes were open. I blinked. He was gone. I didn't tell Sam. There was no point. We started losing time. Whole hours vanished. One moment, we were counting our remaining food. 3 crackers, 1 can of corn. And the next, the sun had shifted, and the shadows were wrong. Sam claimed I'd slept through it. I hadn't closed my eyes. I was sure of it. We argued over water, over hallucinations, over whether or not the sea was doing this. Then we cried, both of us. I remember holding her in the cabin, our foreheads pressed together, both of us shaking but not from cold. The worst part wasn't the hunger or the thirst. It was that the ocean wasn't killing us. It was undoing us piece by piece, thought by thought. It wanted us alive just long enough to be broken, and we were cracking. One night I heard whispering, not in words, but in the waves. They slapped the hull in patterns, too regular, too deliberate. It felt like a language, one I didn't want to understand. I stayed up until morning, staring into the blackness, clutching a rusted wrench like it could keep something away. When the sun rose, I thought I saw footprints on the bow, wet ones, but they didn't lead onto the boat. They led off. Even as the ship came, I couldn't help it. I kept looking back, expecting the ocean to rise and drag us back down. The sea let us go, but not entirely. The Taiwanese trawler was the first real thing we'd seen in weeks. No hallucination, no mirage. Sam saw it first, just a dark smudge on the edge of dawn. We both stared, too afraid to believe. I remember grabbing the cracked mirror from the tool locker, waving it until my arm gave out. The flash caught their attention. A voice crackled over the trawler's deck speaker, distorted by distance and salt. Then, silence. An hour later, the USS Ashland appeared like a ghost made of iron, gray, immense, and impossibly solid. I don't remember being pulled aboard, only the cold of the blanket against my skin and the sound of boots hitting metal around me. We didn't speak, not even to each other. The words had dried up long before the water did. The medics tried asking questions, but I could only nod. Sam didn't look at them. She stared past them, back toward the sea. It watched us the whole time. The Ashland's medic smiled when he cleaned our wounds, said we were lucky, said the worst was behind us. I nodded, but I didn't agree. I didn't tell him about the footprints, wet and leading off the bow. I didn't tell him about the gulls that Sam still swore she could hear even in the med bay, echoing through the bulkheads. The ship turned west toward Japan. It was over. Except it wasn't. That night, as the ashland cut through the water like a blade, I woke in a panic. I couldn't breathe. I clawed at my blanket, heart hammering. The lights were dim, the kind of hush that ships keep in the dark hours. And then I felt it. The hum of the ship was steady beneath my feet. But something else moved beneath that. A drag, like weight, shifting under the hull. Something enormous, slow, deliberate. I walked the corridor barefoot, drawn by instinct. Sam was already there, standing at the porthole. She didn't look at me when I joined her. She didn't need to. We saw it, not clearly, only the suggestion of shape. A shadow that stretched too long, that moved against the current. No wake, no splash, just presence. The water boiled softly in its path. "Do you see it?" she whispered. I nodded. We stood there for hours, watching, listening. The sea didn't want us dead. It wanted us haunted, changed. It had shown us its face, and now we couldn't look away. When the ashland finally made port, Sam and I stepped onto the dock like survivors of a war no one else had fought. People asked us questions. Reporters tried to speak with us. We smiled, we answered, we said what they wanted to hear. Yes, the storm was terrible. Yes, the sharks were real. Yes, we're lucky to be alive. But we never talked about the voice in the water, the shapes in the dark, the strange pressure like something vast watching us from below. We went back to land, but part of us never left the ocean. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can feel the boat rocking again. But worse, I can feel it waiting, still, beneath us. Story 5, Whispering Snow. When I look back, it wasn't the cold that unnerved me. It was the silence. We'd talked about the Tien Shan for years, me, Rahul, and Michelle. It started as a dorm room fantasy, a poster on my wall with jagged peaks jutting into a cloudless sky. "One day," I used to say, tapping it like a promise. Now, years later, that promise brought us to Kyrgyzstan's edge, standing in the shadow of those same peaks, our boots finally planted in their reality. It was supposed to be healing. I'd burned out after 6 years of grinding deadlines and sleepless nights. Something in me had gone brittle, like ice under strain. So I told them, let's disappear for a while. Rahul said yes, before I even finished asking. My kid brother always looked up to me, even when I didn't deserve it. He claimed he wanted to face his fear of heights, but I think he just wanted to prove something. Michelle? She never needed to reason. Her camera was always ready. "Let's get lost in the sky," she grinned. We arrived at the Alpine base camp in early summer, though you wouldn't know it by looking. Snow lay in long blue shadows, untouched. Thin trails wound through sharp rock and glacial hush. The place felt like the beginning of a dream, beautiful, fragile, and too quiet. The sky was painfully clear that evening, streaked with orange fire, and a crescent moon just barely clinging to the horizon. You could hear everything in the silence. Boots shifting, wind sighing through fir trees, the faint creak of snow adjusting itself. The local guide, an older man with wind-etched skin, gave us a shrug when we asked about the trail ahead. "Easy," he muttered, but something in his eyes said otherwise. He didn't like the mountains, not really. He said less and less the higher we went, eyes always flicking toward the ridgelines. That night, he sat by the fire, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, fidgeting. Michelle kept snapping photos even in the dim light. eager to capture everything before the real trek began. "Golden hour," she said, "always feels like magic." I didn't disagree, but there was something about the way the light fell across the snow that made it seem less like magic and more like warning. The ridges cast long shadows that stretched toward us as if reaching. Rahul said it was just the altitude making me feel weird. Maybe it was just the knowledge that no signal would reach us up here, no messages, no rescues, nothing but what we brought and what the mountain allowed. At dawn, we left. Our packs were light, spirits high. The guide stayed behind, as agreed. He'd marked our map with a clear route, one well used by locals, though we hadn't seen a soul since arrival. We crossed a narrow pass with crampons biting into the icy trail. Below us, a white valley opened like a story untouched by time. The silence followed us. Crunch, crunch, the sound of boots pressing into snow. Michelle gasped softly at every glint of ice. Rahul kept close behind me, his breath forming little clouds in the cold. "Not so bad," he said. His voice was too loud, awkward against the hush. For a while, the path wound smoothly. I found myself admiring the delicate frost patterns clinging to boulders, the spiny outlines of frozen ferns. The sky was turning pale blue, not a cloud in sight. If I didn't know better, I would have said we were safe. But I did know better. I always had. We stopped on a small rise to catch our breath and hydrate. I turned back to look at the trail we'd carved behind us. 3 sets of prints, spaced in uneven rhythm. Above us, the ridgeline stood sharp and watchful. Michelle pointed toward the far glacier. "That," she whispered, framing it in her lens, "is perfect." The wind stirred. It didn't howl. It whispered, a low, hushed murmur that slid between the rocks like breath down a spine. I rubbed my arms. Suddenly cold. None of us spoke of the tension we felt. Not yet. But I saw Rahul's eyes linger too long on the sheer slopes. Michelle's lens trembled just a bit in her hands, and in my chest, something small and instinctive coiled tightly. Still, we pressed on. The sun edged higher, casting glints off every untouched surface, so bright it hurt. We were living our dream, each step an echo of what we'd once wished for. But dreams, I've learned, have sharp edges, and up here, in this place of snow and silence, even echoes can vanish without a trace. The morning sun hung low behind a veil of cloud as we threaded through the mountain pass, its golden light barely touching the snow. The brightness didn't bring warmth, only a stark clarity that made the world feel brittle, like a porcelain shell about to crack. The silence was deeper now, as if we'd crossed into a place the wind forgot. Michelle's camera clicks echoed too sharply off the rock, like they didn't belong here. Nothing did, not even us. I tried to focus on the trail ahead, calling out occasionally to check on Rahul behind me. He grinned every time, nervous but pushing forward. "One peak at a time," he joked, repeating the line he'd used since college. I smiled back, proud of him. He was finally facing the thing he feared most. High cliffs, loose stone, icy paths, exposure. Michelle hung back, fascinated by how the snow turned blue and shadow and silver in the sun. She crouched often, adjusting her lens, capturing twisted trees frozen in time and glacial streams locked beneath thick ice. She always saw beauty, even in desolation. But today, her photos felt different. She didn't smile after each shot. We paused for water near a narrow ledge that dropped into a snow-choked ravine. That's when Rahul saw it, the ibex. It was sprawled unnaturally on its side, half submerged in drifted snow, hooves stiff and reaching upward. Its eyes, pale, cloudy, wide open, stared straight at us. Rahul said nothing at first, just pointed, then quietly, "Fresh." Not even scavenged. I stepped closer. No blood, no tracks, no sign of what had happened. It hadn't fallen. It had stopped, like it had frozen mid-motion. Michelle raised her camera but didn't click. She whispered, "This place is too still." The words sank into me like ice water. I tried to shake it off. Said something about altitude playing tricks, but even I didn't believe it. The hairs on my arms had risen under 3 layers of fleece. The air was colder here, heavier. The silence didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt held, like the mountain was holding its breath. We pressed on, trying to stay close. The trail narrowed to a thin shelf of rock hugging the base of a ridge. Snow had drifted up to our knees in some places, hiding the true edge. I told Rahul to watch his footing. He nodded, distracted, scanning the heights. It started as a whisper, a sigh across the cliffs. At first, I thought it was just wind slipping through stone teeth, until I realized I couldn't feel wind. Michelle stopped walking, her head tilted, camera hanging from her neck. "Did you hear that?" I did. Not a whisper, a creak, a groan so low it made my ribs ache. Above us, far beyond the highest ledge, something shifted. A deep sound, almost organic, like wood splitting under pressure. Rahul turned sharply, squinting up at the ridge. A few stones trickled down. He stepped back instinctively. "Nope," he said too fast. "That was rocks, settling." He wasn't convincing himself, let alone us. I opened my mouth to speak when the echo returned, louder this time. Not rocks, not settling, a crack, long and drawn out, like an enormous zipper being slowly pulled across the sky. Michelle took a single step back. "That's not wind, that's something shifting." Another sound rolled across the valley, not a crack, not a groan, but a deep pressure, a vibration we felt in our boots more than heard, like the mountain was grinding its teeth beneath us. That was when I knew something was wrong, very wrong. The ibex, the silence, the air that didn't move. This place didn't want us here. We picked up the pace, suddenly huddling close as we passed under an overhang caked with snow and ice. Michelle didn't take any more pictures. Rahul stopped joking. Then, without warning, Michelle veered toward a large boulder, drawn by the curve of the land. She wanted just one wide shot before the sun dipped behind the peaks. I told her to be quick, already feeling the weight in the air pressing harder. She climbed the rock with practiced ease, crouched slightly, adjusted her camera, and raised it to eye level. Then it came, a sound so sharp, so clear, it felt like the sky itself split open. Crack. Michelle froze. Her camera dropped slightly, her eyes widened, lips parting. I couldn't breathe. Another sound followed, longer, deeper, like an ancient door groaning open somewhere in the clouds. Michelle turned to look at me, and I saw it in her face. Recognition. She'd heard this before. She knew. The scream hadn't started yet, but the mountain was waking up, and it was about to come down. I don't remember the exact moment the sky changed. One moment, the clouds were harmless wisps stitched across a blue expanse. The next, the light felt sharper, wrong somehow, like the air had been pulled too tight. Michelle was standing on a boulder just ahead of us, fussing with her camera. She looked small against the vast glacier behind her, like she didn't belong there, like none of us did. Then came the sound, not loud at first, a low, deep groan, like the mountain exhaling from beneath its skin. I froze. So did Rahul. Michelle turned. Her expression shifted from concentration to horror in a heartbeat. Then, crack. It sounded like the world splitting in half. My body reacted before my brain could. I screamed, "Move!" But my voice was drowned almost instantly by the howl that followed. The sound of 1,000 tons of snow tearing itself loose from the peaks above. The wind shifted, and suddenly the sound was everywhere. A deep, rolling thunder that didn't stop. It felt alive, racing toward us. It wasn't just sound, it was pressure, weight. I looked up and saw it. A wall of white, towering, crashing, coming for us. Michelle leapt from the boulder, scrambling behind it as snow began to rain down. Rahul turned, tried to run up the slope, to climb, to get clear, but the ground beneath him was already shifting. I saw him stumble just once, then he was gone. I dove flat, face first onto a bare patch of rock. My ribs screamed. Snow hit like a battering ram, hard and suffocating. A noise like a jet engine roared over me, burying every sound, every breath. White swallowed the world. I couldn't see, couldn't breathe. My arms flailed, searching for something solid, something that wasn't snow or fear or pain. A branch, or maybe a broken trekking pole, raked across my side. I curled tighter. Time lost meaning. There was only the endless roar. And then, as fast as it came, it was over. Silence. Not the peaceful kind. Not like the hush of snowfall back at base camp. This was a silence that crushed, that pressed into your skull until your ears rang. I pushed up, gasping. The world was buried, flattened. Frost clung to my eyelashes. My lips cracked from the cold. I looked around, frantic. "Michelle," I croaked. A moan answered from a few feet away. I scrambled toward the sound, heart hammering. She was half buried, blood trickling from her forehead. A snapped branch had trapped her leg under a log. Her camera was nowhere. Her face was raw with windburn and terror. "Laura," she rasped, eyes wide, "where's Rahul?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. We dug. God, we dug with our hands until our fingers bled. Screaming Rahul's name over and over, hoping his voice would answer from beneath the snow. Nothing. Only white silence and the soft whimper of wind moving through the valley. We found his glove, a piece of his parka, his GoPro, smashed and dangling by a strap, barely visible in the snowdrift, and then nothing more. His trail disappeared, like the mountain had taken him and sealed the wound behind it. We sat there, Michelle clutching her leg, me shaking, useless, staring at the glacier where he'd last stood. I wanted to scream, to punch the earth, but all I did was whisper his name again and again, as if I could will the snow to spit him back out. I didn't cry yet, not then. The cold didn't let me. All I could think was, I should have grabbed him. I should have pulled him back, but I hadn't. And now he was gone. Night came fast on the mountain. We limped to a hollow below a rocky lip and tried to stay warm. I lit a fire with trembling hands, though it barely took. Michelle winced as she adjusted her leg. Blood had soaked her pant leg. Her face was pale. Still, she reached for my hand. "We're going to be okay," she said. But the wind had started again, and in the howl I could almost swear I heard it, a voice, faint, calling my name. Laura. But it was only snow, only the mountain. I told myself that, again and again, until the darkness pressed too close and the whispering started once more. The fire hissed low, half-eaten by snowmelt and shadows. We had no dry kindling left, only cracked pine needles and a torn trail map we used as fuel. It spit sparks into the wind, dying in a blink. Around us, The white world held its breath again. Michelle hadn't spoken in nearly half an hour. Her face, smeared with ash and fear, leaned against her arm as she lay curled near the boulder that shielded us from the worst of the wind. Her lips moved sometimes, but I couldn't hear what she said. I didn't want to. Her leg was wrapped in gauze from the emergency kit, blood long frozen into the fabric. The pain dulled her voice, but I could feel her trembling. I couldn't do more. My hands burned from cold and digging, fingernails cracked. Rahul's name kept slipping from my lips before I could stop it. I whispered it like a charm, like a thread I might still follow to find him. But the snow gave nothing back. I'd seen him last in flashes, flailing arms, eyes wide. Then the sky turned white. That blinding wave swallowed the ridge. Afterward, it was only silence and that terrible stillness, the kind that wraps around your lungs and waits, and beneath it all, that whispering. The wind up here doesn't howl, it murmurs. It slips between rocks and over the snow like something listening. It never felt like wind, it sounded like breath. Hours passed. The dark sky offered no comfort. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop seeing Rahul. Once, I thought I heard him calling, a faint, drawn-out Laura, through the black. I sat up so fast I felt my ribs scream, but there was nothing, just wind or something hiding in it. Michelle stirred. "Did you hear that?" she asked, eyes darting wild. "No," I lied. She started crying, quiet and raw. I pulled the emergency blanket tighter around us, but nothing could warm her. Somewhere just beyond the ridge, the snow creaked, slowly, like something shifting its weight. At some point, I must have dozed off. When I opened my eyes again, the fire was gone. A thin blue light had settled over everything. Dawn, if you could call it that, stained the horizon behind the peaks. I looked at Michelle. Her eyes were closed, breathing shallow, lips cracked from the cold. I crawled out from the hollow and stood on the ridge. The valley below was a frozen grave. Ice had sealed every trace. Not even birds dared to fly here. I screamed Rahul's name one last time, with everything left in me, and the mountain whispered it back. Not an echo, a reply. We stumbled down the slope, following the faint pencil line of the ranger's rescue path. I held Michelle up, her arm around my shoulder. Every step, her boot sank too deep. Every gust felt like a voice at our backs. I wouldn't look behind me, then color. Red jackets clustered near the base of a ridge. A rescue team. Their radios crackled. One of them waved. We collapsed into them. I heard Michelle gasp, sobbing as they took her weight. I couldn't speak. I just pointed. Up the ridge, where Rahul's camera hung by its strap, caught on a blackened pine. The lens was cracked, the memory card still intact. I didn't want to watch what was on it, but later, in the ambulance, I did. The footage begins hours before the avalanche. Rahul's voice is lighthearted, teasing Michelle about her slow pace. They laugh. Then, silence. A long shot of the glacier, and then, moments before the world ended, the camera jerks upward. A strange vibration runs through the image, not just from falling snow. Something else moves across the far ridge, just barely visible, a shape, too tall, too smooth, walking upright along the edge of the cliff. No face, no details, just movement where there should have been nothing. Then the sound, a deep, crackling breath, and the camera goes black. They never found Rahul's body. They searched for days. Nothing, not a trace. Back home, months later, Michelle and I stopped speaking. She moved across the country. I understood. We had both left part of ourselves up there. I don't think she could stand the reminder. I kept the camera. I kept the shattered lens. I kept waking up at night, gasping, thinking I'd heard someone whisper my name just outside the window. I know it wasn't just an avalanche. The mountain chose. Rahul was taken, not lost, taken. Because even now when it snows outside my apartment, sometimes the wind carries that same sound, the whisper, long and low and watching, and sometimes, just sometimes, I hear a name in it, not mine, Rahul's, still calling, still out there, still waiting beneath the whispering snow. Story 6, Eye of the Storm. It was supposed to be perfect, the kind of trip you cut out of a travel magazine and pinned to the fridge during the worst months of winter. Isla Verde. The name alone sounded unreal, like something made up by a brochure writer. Jacob and I landed on the sun-scorched runway still in our wedding glow, our suitcases clunky with too many swimsuits and not enough common sense. The air was thick and sweet with salt, and even the taxi ride from the airstrip to the resort felt cinematic. White sand, palm fronds glinting with the last drips of a morning rain. We checked in at a thatch-roofed reception desk that opened right onto the sea. "Honeymooners," the concierge chirped. She handed us a conch shell key and pointed toward a bungalow near the rocks. It was everything we'd hoped: secluded, soft mosquito netting over the bed, an outdoor shower surrounded by orchids, and no cell service. I remember turning to Jacob on the first night, staring out over the surf as the tide rose and whispering, "We did it. We escaped." We spent the first day in a dreamy fog, snorkeling near the reef where neon fish darted through coral caverns, coconut pancakes at sunrise, a beach so quiet I could hear the scrape of our flip-flops in the sand. I even started journaling, something I hadn't done since high school. Just little things, the shape of the waves, the sound of distant drumming from a fishing village, the way Jacob's laugh echoed when we saw a crab wearing a bottle cap like a helmet. There were only hints of something off. The front desk mentioned a developing storm far out to sea. The bartender rolled his eyes and said, "Seasonal talk. Always something." But I noticed things. A vendor in town closed early, mumbling in a language I didn't know and pointing nervously at the sky. A cluster of pelicans flew inland all at once, veering hard over the treetops. The ocean lost its usual rhythm. It became still, like a sheet of glass. That night, Jacob fell asleep quickly, sunk deep in post-swim exhaustion. I stayed up and stood by the bungalow window, watching the stars vanish one by one behind darkening clouds. The breeze had a strange feel, too warm, like breath on the back of my neck. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something big. I remember closing the shutters before bed, even though there was no rain. I told myself it was just to keep the insects out. But deep down, something more primal stirred, something old, older than storms. The island was too quiet, and in that silence, I swear, I heard a low groan, not from wind, not from trees, but from deep beneath the sand, like the island itself was bracing. I lay down next to Jacob, heart knocking against my ribs, and forced myself to sleep. The last thing I wrote in my journal that night was, "Paradise doesn't hum anymore, it holds its breath." The next morning felt heavier. The sky was too pale, like the color had been drained out overnight. Jacob made coffee on the porch, humming a tune from the steel drum band we'd heard the night before. I tried to hum along, but something in my chest felt tight. The ocean was too calm, like a held breath. That's when the first warning came on the television. We were at the beachside cafe, still in damp swimsuits, when the emergency alert cut into the midday news. The anchor's voice sounded rehearsed but tense. Tropical storm Beatriz has now intensified into a Category 3 hurricane with sustained winds of 120 miles per hour. Forecast models show a rapid acceleration. Some say it may reach Category 5 strength before landfall. Jacob's brow furrowed. I remember how his hand tightened around his water bottle. "It's probably just a precaution," he said, almost to himself. "These things turn off course all the time." But it wasn't turning. I could feel it, like how you can feel your skin prickle before lightning hits. The resort manager brushed it off with a stiff smile. "We've had worse. We're too far north for a direct hit. The power might flicker. At most, some rain and wind." Still, the maintenance crew began stacking patio furniture, and guests no longer lingered in the shallows. The honeymooners in the next bungalow were whispering. A local woman behind the snack counter was hurriedly closing up shop, muttering under her breath as she packed fried plantains into foil. I only caught a fragment. The wind's wrong. Even the birds know it. And she was right. By afternoon, the beach was empty. No gulls, no crabs. The shallow reef that had sparkled with darting fish just yesterday was eerily vacant, like something had chased all the life away. We decided to walk the shore one last time. The sand felt sticky, like walking on wet paper. A strong gust lifted my sun hat and flung it into the sea. I didn't chase it. We passed a little girl sitting cross-legged in the sand, just staring at the ocean. No parents in sight. Her hair was soaked, though it hadn't rained. As we passed, she said, softly but clearly, "It's coming too fast." I stopped, glanced at her. "Sweetheart, where's your—" But she didn't respond. Her eyes were wide, locked on the horizon. She didn't blink. We told the front desk. They said she was probably from the village and knew how to look after herself. But I kept thinking about her, that sentence, the way she said it. Jacob was quiet as we packed. Just the essentials: bottled water, granola bars, his pocket knife, a flashlight. I added a change of clothes, my journal, and a small waterproof pouch for our passports. It felt stupid, like we were preparing for a hike, not something that could tear a roof off. That night, the wind started to hum, not whistle. Human, a low buzzing tone that made our bungalow's windows tremble. I heard it even when I pressed my hands over my ears, the kind of sound you feel in your teeth. Then came the knock at the door. It was a resort staff member in a bright orange raincoat. Mandatory evacuation to the shelter, now. We joined a line of guests, being escorted inland by flashlight. No one spoke. The air felt weird, thick but cold, like walking through syrup. The wind was jerking at palm trees, not yet angry, but impatient. As we neared the shelter, I looked back once. The resort's string lights were still glowing behind the trees. Bungalows tucked quietly under swaying fronds. It was beautiful. Then I saw the clouds moving in fast above us, swirling with violent intention. They weren't drifting. They were circling. Inside the shelter, we were herded onto benches and cots beneath high-beam ceilings and boarded-up windows. The building was up on stilts with a wide staircase leading to a concrete slab. Sandbags were already stacked outside. A generator thumped in the corner. Jacob sat beside me, jaw tight. "If the models are wrong, this whole island's in trouble," he whispered. I nodded, but said nothing. Somewhere to our right, someone was softly crying. A little boy played with a broken toy truck, and from the stairwell, a rhythmic tapping echoed. Drip, drip, drip. I tried to tell myself it was rain, but it hadn't started yet. That night, I made one last entry in my journal before the wind truly arrived. There's no thunder, no lightning, just this pressure, like we're beneath something too large to understand. I think the island knows. I think it's afraid. Then the lights blinked. Then the screaming started. We hadn't even seen the worst of it yet. But by then I already knew. We would not leave this island the same people who arrived. If we left at all, it came all at once. The sound, first, like a freight train roaring underwater, then growing until it consumed every corner of the shelter. The floor vibrated beneath our feet. The shutters rattled in their frames. I felt the pressure in my chest, like the storm was trying to suck the breath out of my lungs. Jacob and I were sitting on a bench in the far corner of the shelter, our fingers interlocked and slick with sweat. The wind howled like it was alive, high-pitched, then guttural, then whistling again. Every few seconds the building shuddered under the strain. A palm tree slammed against the outer wall with a deep thud that made people scream. The power snapped off mid-buzz, plunging us into a warm, suffocating dark. Someone turned on a flashlight. The beam cut through the damp air, catching floating debris, paper cups, a child's toy, wet socks. Then the water came. At first it pooled innocently, rising in puddles through the floorboards. I thought it was just runoff. But the stench hit fast. Sewage. Something had ruptured below us. Foul, tepid water surged upward, swirling with trash and slime. I gagged, covered my nose. People scrambled to higher benches and chairs. The old man beside us collapsed without a sound, eyes wide open. His wife was still missing from the earlier evacuation, but nobody had time to mourn. A tourist from Denmark was hyperventilating, her nails scraping grooves into the wooden floor. The fisherman held his daughter close, her arms wrapped tightly around his neck. I could hear her humming, soft and eerie, like a lullaby gone wrong. Jacob noticed the front door shaking violently in its hinges. He rushed over, wading through water now ankle-deep. I helped hold the beam steady while he shoved a screwdriver through the latch hole, hammering it with his boot. The door slammed shut just as something heavy smacked against the outside. He cut his hand in the process, deep from his knuckle to wrist. Blood slicked his palm. I ripped the bottom of my tank top, tying it as tight as I could. He winced, but didn't say a word. Lightning flared, illuminating the windows. The rain wasn't falling down. It was slashing sideways. When thunder struck, the entire structure buckled like it might split open. I wanted to scream, but something worse silenced me. Through the reinforced glass, distorted by water and wind, I saw a face, bloated, swollen, pale as wax. It was pressed to the outside like it had drifted up from below, eyes open, mouth hanging, hair undulating in the current. Then it vanished, like it had never been there. I blinked hard. Maybe it hadn't. "Jacob," I whispered, "did you see that?" He looked, but the water was too murky now. Look, we're scared, that's all." But I knew what I saw. Behind us, a teenage boy vomited into the floodwater, gagging on the smell. Someone began to cry, long and low. The structure groaned again. Plaster rained down from the ceiling. I covered my head, coughing, and noticed a slick shape gliding just under the surface of the water inside. I told myself it was a shadow. I told myself that even as the Japanese man on the other side of the room shouted in terror, his flashlight beam fixed on the water behind the generator. The beam shook violently. I turned to look, but the light died before I could catch it. His wife dragged him back, her face pale and wet with fear. Then, just as suddenly as it began, silence. I felt the change immediately. The wind stopped screaming. No more rain, no thunder. It was like someone had pressed pause on a nightmare. A few survivors dared to speak again, voices thin and hoarse. One man crawled to the window and peered outside. "I think it's over," he whispered. Jacob and I stepped cautiously toward the door. He gripped my hand with his injured one. It was swollen now and hot. Infection already, maybe. The screwdriver in the lock made a faint ping sound as he tapped it loose. We opened the door a crack. The air outside was heavy, still. The sky directly above was a strange, clear circle, an unnatural blue surrounded by a perfect wall of storm clouds. The ocean was foaming and angry, but momentarily still. Pieces of rooftops and palm trunks floated like corpses. We didn't step out. No one did. The silence wasn't safety. It felt wrong. Then came the whisper, faint, from inside the shelter this time, beneath the sloshing water. I swear I heard it. "You shouldn't be here." I turned sharply. No one else reacted. Jacob's eyes locked with mine. "Did you—" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I heard it too." We froze. Because that voice? It wasn't human. And we both knew. This wasn't over. This was just the eye. The other side was coming, and it would be worse. We thought the worst had passed. I remember the way the silence unnerved us all, like stepping out of a nightmare, only to realize it's still gripping you by the ankles. The wind had stopped so suddenly it made my ears ring. A faint glow bled through the shelter's boarded windows. People began to whisper. Some even smiled. "Maybe it's over," someone said. It wasn't. The fisherman was the first to open the door. He wanted air, just a breath. I watched as he stepped outside, his daughter clinging to his shirt until he pulled free. A minute later, he screamed. A shriek, not like a man. We never saw him again. I don't remember running, but I remember the chaos. People surged toward the stairwell, some trying to bolt the door shut, others trying to climb out. A window shattered, and wind sliced through the room like knives. This half of the storm, the backside they called it, was stronger, faster, meaner. It came with no mercy. We huddled in a storage room while the shelter groaned. Roof tiles peeled off and vanished. Rain punched through the walls. Lightning flashed, and for half a second I saw something standing at the edge of the broken window. It looked like a dog, but wrong. Elongated legs, too narrow at the waist, soaked fur hanging in thick ropes from its body. It was upright and smiling. I swear it was smiling. Then it was gone. The generator had drowned by then. The room plunged into blackness. My hands were slick with sweat or maybe blood. Jacob's hand was still wrapped in the shirt I'd torn. He wasn't talking much. The air smelled like rot. Sometime past midnight, I thought I heard a knock beneath the floorboards. Just one, then another, tap, 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 like someone wanted in or out. I covered my ears, but the sound moved up the wall. We weren't alone, not anymore. Somewhere in the darkness, a woman screamed and then fell silent. Dawn came like a mercy we hadn't earned. The world outside was ash-colored and mutilated. The beach, gone. Just shredded trees, broken glass, and warped metal. The shelter had collapsed in one corner. Jacob and I helped dig a woman out. She had a broken arm and no voice left. The fisherman's daughter stood in silence beside a toppled generator, cradling something in a towel. I looked closer. It was her father's rain boot. Just one. We walked the road back toward the resort, or where it had been. It was a trail of ruin now. A sandal bobbed in a puddle. A photograph clung to a tree trunk, swollen and pale. A broken camera lay in the mud, its lens cracked like an eye. The beach dogs Anna had played with were gone. No bodies, just paw prints that stopped at the edge of a cliff. The hotel lobby was buried under driftwood. A search team flagged the wreckage with bright tape. Nearby, someone had assembled a crude stretcher from pool chairs and rope. We sat on it until the rescue chopper came. As we lifted off the island, I looked back one last time. The sea was still rising. Storm clouds clustered again at the horizon like vultures circling a corpse. There was nothing left of paradise, only bones. The nurse who helped us onto the boat said we were lucky, survivors, but I don't feel lucky. I feel hollowed out, like something inside me was taken when the wind passed through. I held Jacob's hand. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. All I could think of were those taps beneath the floor, and the thing I saw smiling in the storm. We came to Isla Verde for beauty. We left carrying silence. That's all that survived the eye of the storm.